What's up, dudes? Welcome back to another installment of the ElCamino build. Today we're looking at getting some sort of steering set up, kind of fit it in there, figure it all out, because if you watched last video, those seats are in, everything's good, the crossbar is done, the crossbar is in, the brackets for all the harnesses are done, the seat belts, the brackets for the seats are all done, they're all locked in, sort of, except for that passenger seat. I haven't bolted it down yet, but everything bolts into place. It fits exactly where I need it to be. There's a couple little adjustments to do on the seat belt, but now that I know where everything sits and everything's good, before I move on with the floors and the firewall and everything else on this rig, I'm gonna have to figure out exactly where I want to put that steering wheel, because I think steering wheel position is very important. Mind you, this is a stock steering wheel, stock setup and all that, so I'm still gonna put a spacer in there probably, because I'm gonna run a quick release, probably put a deep dish Sparco on it, because that's the kind of steering wheel I just really like to run and use. But I wanna make sure that I got the right angle for my arms and everything else. I'm gonna have to make a custom shaft for this thing, connect it. I've got some universal joints that I could use for it from older steering setups and everything else, but I have to figure out how to match the ElCamino steering parts to the Corvette steering parts. Now, the ElCamino originally came with a big, nasty, ugly steering box. So the parts on this thing are pretty barbaric. They're pretty big and ugly for no reason. There's a lot of moving parts on this thing, a lot of rods and connectors, stuff for like the steering, the lock, the key. All that stuff is still on here. So I'm doing the best I can with figuring out where it's all gonna land. I'm gonna have to cut off every stock bracket that's on this thing, because there's no way it's gonna mount anywhere near the way it was. And I'm gonna have to make sure that it sits in the firewall in the right spot so that it goes out and misses the headers, misses any kind of engine component that could potentially get in the way. I gotta make sure that it's easy to work on. There's a lot of things to factor in when I'm playing around with this idea and trying to figure out where to go next. So first things first, I'm just gonna take the steering column, we're gonna clean it all up, get rid of all the extra components that I don't need. I'm gonna leave probably the key on it, and there's a little tilt thing, and I'm probably gonna ditch that flasher. I left it on for now, but probably gonna either take it off or just do kind of like a little technique in here where I, eventually just use a hammer. If you can't figure out how to unbolt it, it'll come off, just like that. So getting everything else cleaned up, I know that I'm gonna have to do some welding on this thing too, so I'm gonna have to clean up enough spots on it, and hopefully the metal's thick enough on this thing that I can actually weld straight to it. But the first thing I gotta do is get rid of this little shroud sort of deal that's here. It's supposed to protect, I guess, stuff from coming up through the firewall. There's rubber seals on the bottom of it. It's a mounting point. It mounts your steering column to the floor, so it gives you another point and makes it all kind of triangulate and nice and good. Also in there is the shifter part for the automatic transmission. Now the only thing that's kind of good for on this, because it's going to be manual, is there's a certain way to use that little lever there where you can lock out your steering, so it's an extra safety kind of thing, because this car's not going to have an alarm on it or anything. At least I could kind of lock it up if I go to an event and just leave it sit outside at night or something like that. It's not like anybody's going to mess around at those events anyways. Those dudes are all super fucking cool guys. But I did anyways. So now I'm cleaning this thing off to try to get a little bit of a spot that I could weld brackets to it, because my firewall has totally changed positions now on this ElCamino. It was nowhere near stock, and with the seating position and everything else where it is, a stock steering wheel, steering column and position and all that, that's just not going to work out. In fact, later on you can see in a later process of this ElCamino, I've put the dash into it, and you can see a monstrous gap between the steering column and the bottom of the dashboard where the gauges sit. And that's because everything is so low, the seating position is so low and everything else, that it all sits down much further, and it looks kind of funny, but it's all right at the same time, so I'm just gonna figure out a way to blend it all in when it's all done. Again, stick around and watch all the videos, because that's gonna happen in a much later video. But right now I'm measuring things up and making a little bit of a plate. Now, I don't know if this is going to be a solid solution, a permanent solution, what have you, but I got to get that thing to sit in there a little bit so I know kind of where it's going to be, and that we can move on and start planning around it. So what I'm doing here is I'm making a little plate, a very, very simple bracket. So I'm going to make a plate that has holes in it, then I'm going to take a piece of tubing, and I'm going to figure out exactly how high it's going to sit. I'm going to measure that tubing, and I'm going to cut the tubing to fit the proper height, weld it all together, put it onto the cage. So basically this steering column is going to be hanging off the cage, and that's the upper mounting point. Now the bottom mounting point, later on I'm going to have to make some sort of plate system where the plates have holes through them and the other end is fitted with a bolt. I haven't got a riv nut set yet, or what do they call that? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. You put a rivet in, it's threaded. So I'd like to get one of those. That would have made things like this much easier. but I just got to make my own. So with this plate, what I'll end up doing is welding a nut onto the back, putting the bolt through, fastening it, welding the nut to it, and then hoping that it didn't work too much so that I can take the bolt out of it and see how it all ends up. But for now, this one's fairly simple because it already has brackets on the steering column. I'm just going to reuse those, drill the hole in a good spot, and the ones on the steering column are actually a little bit adjustable forward and back, so that way if I need to play with anything before making it all solid, it's there. It's an opportunity to kind of line things up good, because the plate that I'm going to put on the lower half of this will not be adjustable in any way, shape, or form. So again, we go with the classic, use the punch, and then when you're drilling, you just put your bit right in the center of that hole. It stops your drill bit from walking around. Hoping some of these tips that you guys get in this video will help. Most of you guys watching this probably already know this stuff, and a lot of you guys watching this probably know way more than me anyway, but if I can help you in any way, I'm totally happy about that. So brackets, brackets, brackets. A lot of this part, a lot of the next parts in these videos is just going to be making brackets to hook things up, but it's kind of fun. I mean, you get to kind of set up things your own way and your own kind of vision to it. And I mean, I know that stock cars, a car that's built from factory, has hours and hours and hours of all kinds of research and development into it, but there's something about taking something apart and reconfiguring it that I just kind of like. I know it's probably not any better than it was factory, but in my head it's more fun, and I like to think that. But anyways, I'm babbling again. We get like most of the way through these videos and I just start babbling about stuff, but move on. So take the flap disc grinder, make that thing a little bit smoother, more presentable. It is going to be on the top of the steering column, so it's probably going to be a piece that you just notice right away. So we'll get that out and do the other end on it. This part's kind of long. Like, I don't know if you guys get it. I don't know if I have to film like cleaning up every little thing, but anyways, put that plate on there. Drop some bolts in it, make sure it's all good, it fits all nice and snug and kind of where I want it to be. Right now I'm just using these stupid little square head screws with a nut on the back of them because it was quick, easy, accessible, and I don't want to start messing around with like big bolts and then figuring out what I need and then losing them. So these are kind of throwaway deals, and if it breaks, it breaks, and if this bracket's scrap, I don't really care. You get to move on. Tighten them up a little bit to make it fit properly, but these, like I said, this bracket's a little bit adjustable, so I don't know if tightening them up too much would stop it from doing that, but I didn't tighten them all the way, just in case, get a little bit of slack to move around. So now we're putting the steering column in the car. I grabbed some of the mechanic wire. It's pretty handy. It's like, kind of like, you remember being a kid and using pipe cleaners to make crafts and stuff? That's cool, right? It's kind of like that, but you cut it to length. It's not fluffy, it's just straight steel, stainless, so it won't rust, which is cool. And then I use that to sort of set the steering wheel up, put it where I need it to be, and hang it up. These front bars, yeah, they didn't work out. You're gonna see later on that I found something pretty crazy about the front end of this thing, and it was a pretty big deal. But anyways, I'm taking those out now to try to make some room. Another thing is this cowl, the front end of this thing has got to go. I'm bringing everything back as far as I can. If you watch other videos, you know this motor and transmission move back a little bit more than 8.5 inches. So that through the engine, as you can see right there, underneath the cowl for the front end. Like the firewall is basically in the cab. That's how much room I moved it back, and that's how much stuff I got to get rid of. I didn't really have to cut off these pieces like the cowls. It was kind of nice because it sort of held my fenders in place. But on the other hand, it's a lot of excess overhang, and it just totally prevented me from really getting in there and being able to work on it. We'll get to set that up soon, and I hope you guys stick around because there's so much more to go. Thanks for watching, dudes. Subscribe.
If you can't fix